Did you know that onions are a self-seeding vegetable, which means they can go to seed and replant themselves? Well, this year I have experienced it firsthand. What I thought was a failed garden bed of onions from this past spring has actually turned into an entire garden bed full of newly sprouted onions. So I thought today would be a fun video to share what happened and why it happened. Hi there, I'm Audrey from Audrey's Little Farm, and I help passion-driven people trailblaze their way to a more self-sufficient life filled with happiness, plants, and chickens. So to start off, I wanted to provide you with a few quick details. At the time of recording this video, it is December, and I am a gardener in Central California in Zone 9B. I planted this garden bed of onions behind me in early spring of this year, and they started off growing great, but then I just sort of forgot about them. I knew that they still needed time to mature, and so I kept putting off harvest because I wanted the bulbs to get a bit bigger, but before I knew it, the temperatures quickly rose well into the hundreds, and before I knew it, the onion tops had completely died off. But once again, I kept putting off harvest because this past summer our son was a newborn, and so pretty much all of the gardening tasks got put on hold. But then by the end of summer, the onions really looked completely dead, and I definitely thought there was no return and I was not going to be getting anything out of this garden bed of onions. As time went on, it was time to start preparing for my fall garden, and so I came out to the garden to start tearing out old plants, but the dirt was so hard and the onions just kept breaking off, and so I decided to just leave them until I could water the bed and actually pull out all of the bulbs. But I didn't get around to it, and before I knew it, it was a little bit cooler weather and we got some rain, and I came out to the garden one day and the green tops of the onions were starting to come back. Then shortly after, the onions started bolting, which means they were heading to seed, and so I remember waiting for them to completely be done going to seed, and the pods were ready to collect, and I went out to the garden to collect the seeds, but then I decided not to because I just thought it would be simpler to buy onion transplants like I normally do. And so I left the seeds on the plants and I just didn't do anything. And so once again, after letting them be, I would notice them every time I came out to the garden and just be reminded of the fact that I needed to take out those old onions that were no longer edible, and the seeds were no longer able to be collected. And time just kept passing and I just kept looking at the failed bed of onions. But then as the days continued to go by, the weather's continued to get cooler and we've continued to get rain. And the other day I came out to the garden and I noticed an entire bed of newly sprouted onions. So now, even though the onions are sporadic, if I choose to, I can gently dig up the transplants and plant them at the correct spacing and leave the ones that are spread out far enough and let them just continue growing as they are. So what sort of appeared to be an onion failure is now what I am considering an onion success. And going forward, I likely wouldn't try to make this happen because I would rather just plant my onions at the correct spacing in straight rows like they should be. But I am so amazed at what plants can really do. Watching the entire life cycle of a plant is such a fun process, and I'm just truly amazed every year when I see the different things that plants can do. And so if you'd like to try to replicate the process, you can do so. Or if you would like to plant onions as transplants, which is what I would typically recommend, head to this video here where I go over when and how to plant onions successfully so that you can have a great crop of onions. I will see you there.